when you do blind smoking, when you basically remove the THC, you just have people smoke it, usually the intensity of the high does not correlate with the percentage of THC actually on the bud.
This is The Dime. Dive into the cannabis and hemp industry through trends, insights, predictions, and tangents.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of The Dime. I'm Brian Fields, and with me, as always, is Kellen Finney. And this week, we've got a very special guest, Nate Lipton, co-founder of Canna, Grow House, and Grow Network. Nate, thanks for taking the time. How are you doing today?
Doing well. I'm had my coffee, have my tea now because I'm a caffeine freak. I like to have all different variants. But yeah, feeling good. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Excited to dive in. Kellen, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Back home finally after a lot of travel, and I'm super excited to talk to Nate and big fan of what he does out there. Brian, how are you?
I'm doing well, and I appreciate you asking, Kellen, and not giving us a weather update for what we're doing.
I'm working on getting better.
Nate, for the record, yes. Nate, I will ask, Nate, your location for the record.
For the record, I am in Tucson, Arizona, near the Swan and River area, for those who know Tucson, kind of near the base of the mountains.
So we will check off the West Coast. The West Coast, yes. Another one for the West Coast. So I'm excited to kind of dive in. Nate, for our listeners, can you give a little background about you and how you kind of got into the cannabis space?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been in the cannabis space since I graduated college in 2010, working in dispensaries, cultivation, equipment used for cultivation. And, in 2011, after working for a few other companies, I started Growers House in Tucson, Arizona. Equipment supply company for hobbyists and commercial growers. And then, in the years that followed, we launched other companies associated and affiliated companies like Growers Network. That's growersnetwork.org. It's a forum and a website to learn cultivation knowledge, as well as communicate with other growers. And then we launched the Cannabis YouTube series, which is kind of like what we call a docu-series. We call it edutainment, educational and entertaining, where we do kind of like a walkthrough of commercial growing operations that are growing some of the best cannabis in the country, and we try and show how they do it. Like, what are their processes and methodologies? What products are they using? So that we can kind of make that knowledge a little more democratized and people can learn. Because, right now, I don't think people know this, but there's over 10,000 commercial licensed businesses growing cannabis. So a lot of them are new, never done this before on a legitimate level. Some of them are families who are oh yeah, I used to have a convenience store. Now screw it, I'm going to go try a hand at cannabis. And there's a lot of information that people want to absorb, and I think we're providing kind of what I think of as Discovery Channel's How It's Made episode, but on how to grow cannabis as a profession, as a business.
I'm really glad you shared that. I'm excited to kind of dive into that because I think what your team's doing there is really not recognized for how much value it's doing, because across the series is just jam-packed with information. So I want to stay back when you first got started in the space. Did you always think you wanted to be in the cannabis industry? Were there hesitations to kind of dive in? Take us back to that origin days when you first wanted to get into the space.
Yeah, I think when I was in college, I was always, the best way I can put it is I was very drug friendly. Maybe is a good way to put it.
That's a good way to put
it. And I don't know. I didn't think of it as a career, though. I just thought of it as a lifestyle, right? And I was oh yeah, I'm going to get into one of those careers that everyone tells you about when you're 13. You're a lawyer, doctor, or something. I was I kind of took a lean towards doing mathy things. I love spreadsheets and, I love calculations and figuring things out. So I ended up kind of going the economics/finance direction. And did an internship at Morgan Stanley. And I was bro, I hate this. I absolutely hate it. And then I was okay, I obviously don't like this kind of bureaucratic hierarchical structure. I want it to be a lot more free flowing. I probably need to work in an industry that's not as mature. And maybe I even have to work for myself eventually. So what's that process going to look like? Obviously, I should work for other people and, get kind of bust my chops a little bit. So that's what I did. And I was the cannabis industry is probably the most interesting one because, I think I've heard a lot of people tell me, whether it was professors or mentors or family members that I respected, they're yeah, it's important, maybe how much effort you put into things and maybe how lucky you are and how smart you are, all these things. But, what really kind of matters too is making sure that you're riding a wave that's cresting. And I was cannabis seems like a wave that's cresting. So why don't I, kind of see what I can do there? And that's literally the rest is history. Got into it, never came out of it. And for me, like we even see comments on the Canna Cribs like YouTube where people are just like, man, I would love to go walk through this facility like you just did. And then I wake up in the morning, I'm like, dude, like these guys wish they could have just spent, I just spent 2 days, 12 hours a day running through this facility, filming all this stuff. But at the end of it, I'm like, man, this is really cool. Like, yeah, it was kind of tiring and kind of grueling. And maybe, it was more of like making the sausage rather than consuming it, which is a lot tastier. But man, there was like, I wake up sometimes and it's like, I almost don't even know what it would be like to work in another industry. And I don't think I care to find out too much right now. I'm in too deep and I'm staying here, That's kind of how I feel about the cannabis industry.
When you were first walking through these facilities and getting going, what was the biggest thing that kind of shocked you from like an old school kind of closet grow where you're just supporting you and your friends versus a commercial operation that's licensed, that's trying to support an entire state's market?
Yeah. It's funny. I was talking to someone, I was trying to give them a metaphor of like old school growers versus new school growers. And the metaphor I came up with, which I kind of liked, and maybe this will kind of get to the question a little bit, maybe it'll be a little bit deviant, but so old school growers are like, yeah, they started in their closet, then they started blowing out the garage, then they did multiple rooms, then they might take over a whole house. And they're like super crafty DIYers. They're usually super into like being on forums online or Instagram and like looking up what they can learn from other growers, trying to perfect their craft, doing a little bit of their own research and development. I would say some growers are a little bit better at doing controlled studies versus others. It's like change one variable, keep everything else the same, grow, see how it turns out. Some are like change 10 variables at once and then pick the one that you like most. That's not the way to go. But then you have the other side, which I would say is like, let's just call it traditional ag. Think in your head like the guy who has been growing row crops of corn for 3 generations or something like that. And the weird thing that's happening right now is like we're seeing this convergence of the two, where like you have the old school growers growing in a really big setting and learning some of the commercial ag techniques. But then you have the commercial ag people coming in and, saying like, oh yeah, it's just a plant, I can grow this plant and we're going to grow it the same way I always have. And it turns out they both have a lot to learn from each other, but they both came in not really respecting one another. Okay. But what I'm seeing now is they are a little more receptive to learning from each other. Whereas at first I felt like it was like, them really bashing heads. And it reminded me of like old school days. I'm a big snowboarder and I didn't see this as much, but I grew up watching like snowboarding and skiing documentaries. I remember seeing those old movies, like those 80s, like party, mogul skiing movies where the snowboarder would go up on the mountain. He's like that new school cat, kind of weird. And the skier would be like, dude, get off my hill, and things like that. And it's like the traditional skiing method. And then they used to like separate the mountains. You have like the skiers and the snowboarders. And that's kind of like the two different styles of growers. But now it's like they're starting to play well in the sand together. And like you go to the mountain and you see the skiers, the snowboarders, and all interacting well. And it's like you go to a cannabis conference now and it's like the lines are becoming very blurry between someone who like is a professional cannabis grower and someone who has a background, I would say, in growing cannabis in the legacy market versus someone who's came from traditional ag and now is growing cannabis. And what they're doing is they're realizing like, shit, cannabis actually is a little bit of a different plant. And there are these like small things that I really have to tweak when you're coming from the commercial ag side. And from the cannabis side, they're like, man, these commercial ag guys, they have actually learned some processes that are really efficient that I don't know why we haven't thought of it until now. We really should apply these. So it's really cool to see. And I think people should, not try and have that division of like, am I a legacy grower, am I commercial ag? As long as they don't shit on the other side, right? Just say like, cool, I learned a lot. I have a lot of skills coming with me, but I'm going to be a lifelong learner. Always try and learn from everything that I can to apply myself to grow the best cannabis possible.
I think that's so really well said. And as the industry kind of matures, the trust factor is so critical, right? Because what you're able to do in small scale, when you expand out, you need extra hands and you're not going to be able to have that same artistic touch because it's not as easy to touch all the plants as some can do as they kind of scale out. So I'm curious to know from a trust standpoint, Nate, cannabis has always kind of been a little more hush hush and a little under the radar. How are you able to cultivate those relationships with these growers to allow you to kind of come in with a camera and start filming some of these processes?
So the first episode we ever filmed was at Glass House Farms with Graham Farrar and Kelly and Ash, a few other people that were out there that were business partners of his. And we got in the first episode because we were just like, hey, it's a concept. Graham, and we knew Graham from, just doing business and on the equipment side. And he was like, yeah, seems like a cool project. That's the kind of guy that Graham is. He's like down for anything. It's like, yeah, come on, bring a bunch of cameras. Yeah, I'll just let you in the facility. We'll run around. Cool. Did that. We were not efficient at all. There was like a 10-person team, which is still around 10 people. And then it took us literally 6 to 8 months to edit that episode. And then we launched it on YouTube. And we had no idea whether it was going to do well or not, and did pretty well. Picked up a lot of steam, got a lot of views, and we were like, cool. People started to take notice. People would be messaging me in the industry and be like, yo, I saw that thing that you did. That's pretty rad. And we were like, hey, we lost our ass financially on this first one, but we might be able to monetize this thing in a way we can keep it going. We could do it more often. And I ended up calling another one of our customers, which was Fat Panda up in Washington. We sell them
Golden Pineapple.
Yeah. So they have awesome branding. Rob is their CEO.
Yeah, I walked around the facility. I spent a lot of time with Rob. I've worked with them closely when I was in Washington. I mean, so impressive. They turned that PepsiCo facility into super, super impressed with their facility up in Spokane.
Yeah, Fat Panda, great brand. Rob, crazy guy. He's just a Renaissance fan,
Totally.
But yeah, we went up and I was like, hey, can we do this? And he has a little bit of a marketing mind, I would say, Actually, not a little bit. He has a lot of a marketing mind. And he was like, yeah, this would be great. I'm trying to build a brand. The Washington market's pretty busy. So we filmed that episode, and we what we do is how we monetize the thing. It's not a secret, and I'm not trying to hide this from anyone, but basically we go to a facility and, we ask them for just okay, what's all the kind of equipment that you're using? Cool. And we touch base with those equipment providers, and we say hey, we're going to go film an episode here. If you help us fund the episode and pay for production, we'll give you a little bit more time on camera. We'd love to help get a testimonial from the farm of how they like using your product, and that's how it works. And that's what helps pay for production. So we did it, and then that episode we didn't lose money. We were like, holy shit, okay, we can keep this thing going, And I think now we're at episode 40. Or something like that. I don't even know how many episodes we've done, but we had to get a second host because I don't actually have the bandwidth to host all the episodes. And we have Autumn from Cultivo. She's a really awesome host and a really great cannabis grower. But my day job is running this business. We got 70 plus people. Mainly we help equip facilities and consult. So that's kind of the day job. Doing the Canna Crips thing is more on the weekends, every 3 months, fly out, film a few episodes, then come back to life and reality.
How long are the recordings? Because you cut up a 45 well put together documentary. So my assumption is there has to be a ton of extra footage that has to get sliced down in there. So how long is the total recording? And how long does it take from when let's say you show up on a Wednesday, do you record 3 straight days? How does that work?
I mean, we have so many terabytes of footage. It's wild how much we film. Each episode can be over a terabyte worth of just photos and video. So there's quite a bit. But, we have to plan it with the farm, orchestrate it. They have to be ready. Our team has to be ready. All going to fly out, converge. So it's 3 months planning ahead of time, sometimes even more, 4 months before we even get there. Then we fly out there. It's usually, we have maybe a dinner with the farm the night before, just hey, let's break bread, meet everyone. Let me hear about your story a little bit so we can kind of think about what direction the episode will go in. And then it's usually 2 full days, 12-hour days of filming. And then we fly out. And then it probably takes another 30 days to edit the episode-ish now. It used to take a lot longer, but we've gotten a little bit of a process. And then, you'll see it go live.
I mean, I saw one of your episodes with Jungle Boys, and I was just fascinated with the type of questions you were asking about, how many people have been in this room? And he looked at you and he was like, maybe 5, including you. And it's just wild to think that they opened up their doors to allow you to come in and ask the type of questions you did, which were exceptional because, I mean, you can't find that information elsewhere on the internet. So Was that experience different than the others? I mean, that had to have blown you away when he only said 5 people.
Yeah, it is. And it's, both at the Jungle Boys facility and a few other facilities, they've said like, yeah, you're the first crew that we've ever allowed in here. And we try and, respect that quite a bit. Because when you go into a cannabis operation, look, there's a risk of letting a camera crew in because, what you're scared of is, will these people mess up, our workflow or our processes, or even worst case, are they not going to respect our SOPs of cleanliness and bring something in that could damage our crop? And, we never want that to happen because it would, really tarnish our reputation. I mean, it'd be bad for the farm. It would be a lose, 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 like no one would be happy. So the people on the crew, a lot of them are cannabis growers themselves. We're very, very adamant that when we go in, we're like twice as clean as everyone else in the facility. We've even, people don't see this, but we have like isopropyl alcohol, like our equipment, before going in and, wear lab coats. And we just try and make sure that we're really kind of responsible and respectful of the facility when we go into it. But it is cool that they let us in and do that. And, what some farms have said is, which we didn't intend, but it makes a lot of sense. They're like, we have to give tours all the time, whether it's investors or you got to bring a bank through, or I don't know, it's all these people that want to come through. And they're like, after we filmed an episode, we don't let them come through. We just send them the episode. And so by letting us come in once with 10 people for 2 days, they can prevent like hundreds of people touring their facility. And I was like, oh shit, that's right. So now I tell farms that and they're like, oh yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, come on down. So there's these little like unintended consequences or cool outcomes that have come from it. Obviously just making friends and networking in the industry and learning some of the best practices, seeing what people are up to. I mean, that's rad. So
yeah, I think it's massive for the industry. I think it's great for consumers who can get to see behind the scenes look. And for some of those operators who maybe used to not be comfortable being on camera, that's a big step forward for them to be associated, right? You're asking someone how long they've worked for some of these companies, and 10, 15, 20 years. That's a substantial career in a space that for a while wasn't so comfortable with being on camera, published on social media.
Yeah, exactly. And it's cool hearing their stories too. Like almost everyone we go to, it's like you're talking to companies that are doing 7, 8, even 9 figures in business. And the guy was like, oh yeah, I started dealing when I was 13 and then I started blowing out houses. And next thing you know, I went legal and I started to get legit. And you're like, cool. Like those are rad stories to hear, rather than the guy who's like, yeah, I own 37 other companies and I allocated some equity over here and acquired my 38th. And, hope the macroeconomic environment really supports it,
I feel like that's a New Yorker you had in mind from like a big suited person when you were given that kind of statement. So which one of your guests or which one of the facilities on Canna Cribs did you think one thing going in, but absolutely shocked you when you were leaving? You're like, wow, I completely misrepresented or misthought about that guest prior to going in.
Wow, dude, so many of them. What I might do is speak to some of the most recent ones we just filmed. I just got back from filming Cannabiotics in Los Angeles and then Glasshouse Brands, which is like Carpinteria / Santa Barbara area. And for those of you who don't know, the Glasshouse Brands, they were also our first episode ever. So us going back and filming them now, they're the first episode we've ever filmed where it's like a follow-up, like 5 years later. And it's like, cool, they had like 150 or 300,000 square feet.
Their facility now is insane.
Yeah. Since then, this 5.5 million square foot tomato greenhouse became available on the market. And he was like, Graham was like, and Kelly were like, yeah, well, we can't afford it, but I guess if we go public, we could raise enough money and buy it, and that's what they did. Like, that's the kind of craziness these guys are. But the cool thing is Graham is also like one of those guys that I told you, who's like grew up in Santa Barbara, surfer guy, growing in like property that he shouldn't have, taking maybe some water that he shouldn't have or something like that. And now he's running like one of the biggest cannabis companies in the US. And like, I think there are a lot of people who like look at that and they're like, oh, public cannabis company, dude, screw that. That's against like the ethos of what's happening. And I think to myself, I'm like, cool, well, you can either have like Philip Morris running that facility or you could have someone like Graham. So pick your poison. And I'd way rather have someone like Graham. Like, that guy is cool as shit. So As things happen in the industry, you can't please everyone. It's going to be a lot of haters. I would just say, think twice before, you just immediately blurt out that like people doing cannabis on a large scale is a bad thing 100% of the time. It can be a bad thing. I'm not going to say it's not, but not 100% of the time. So let me, sorry, I was circling around. I'm going to answer part of that question really fast because I realized, I just start speaking and I just go off, right? Like, you say go into first gear, I'm like in sixth, But on the cannabiotic side, what I didn't know is that they have like the number one selling flower strain in all of California called cereal milk, I believe it was. And I was like, dude, these guys came out of nowhere. And they do all their own research and development at their facility, crossbreeding strains, pollination, like phenotyping, tissue culture, tons of cool shit. I had no idea about that going into it. I think those guys are creative. Like, I was speaking to the owner and I was like, you ever sell like your genetics? He's like, no, I've had people offer me like 50 grand for like one clone before, and he's turned it down. I was like, damn, mad respect, And then when it came to Glasshouse brands and gram Farrar and things like that, I guess one of the weird things is like, I heard that, well, let's think of the cannabiotics one. When it comes to the Glasshouse one, I kind of knew what I was jumping into because I've known Graham for some time and I knew what he was up to. So that one, I think I understood what was going on. But if I think of some other cool ones throughout this episode, I'll interject.
So you went to Glasshouse 5 years ago and now you went back for a follow-up episode. Has there been any like specific technology, especially because you're on the supply side as well? Is there any specific technology now that like Glasshouse integrated into their operation that wasn't there 5 years ago that's been kind of a game changer for them? Or is it just kind of getting more commercial ag stuff in these facilities?
Yeah, there are things that have changed over the last 5 years. And the weird thing about cannabis is like the technological innovation for cultivating on the cannabis side it's crazy. It's going at such a fast rate. It's so much faster than like any other agricultural sector. Like there's not enough money in lettuce for someone to invest, $500 million into R&D. Right? It's just, we peaked. We peaked on the lettuce train. But, there's so much cool stuff. Like it's just that the crop is so valuable, people will spend money to optimize it, right? Once the price per pound of cannabis is $100, there's probably going to be less innovation. But until then, a lot of people will be funneling their profits into R&D and optimization. One of the biggest ones is definitely LEDs. Like 5 years ago, everyone was shitting on LEDs. They're like, these are crap, never use LED. And now it's like, basically, if you're not using LEDs, it's probably because of a cash constraint, cash flow purposes. But other than that, it's like almost unilaterally understood that it's just like, yeah, you use LEDs for production, they're going to be more efficient, give you a better product. So Glasshouse is using LEDs where they really weren't before. It was more of just growing with the sun, maybe some HPS or HIDs. I will also say there's people have gotten a lot better on the cannabis side of using less pesticides and herbicides and insecticides and trying to optimize basically like root zone health, use beneficial insects. Some of the things more of that I think is adopted from the commercial ag side. Whereas back in the day with cannabis, they were just like, see a bug, nuke the room,
Everything in Eagle 20.
Yeah.
Every clone gets dipped.
Havoc, forbid, everything like that. And it's like, no, we're testing stuff now. Like, let's find a more elegant and healthy way to treat the plants. So, that's a big shift. And then I would say controls. Like now, these days, like if you don't have a controller that like pings you with a text message and an email when like any parameters out of whack, then you're doing it wrong. Like you're living in the Stone Age. So those are some of the things that I'm seeing. But other than that, still growing in cocoa, still using, what I would call elemental salts and nutrient side. And still growing plants.
Do you think they're leaning on technology because of margin compression to optimize? Is it a mixture of both perspectives? Like, what do you think is leading bigger brands to make the move for advancements in technology and automation?
I think it's always a question of return on investment. So, someone comes to you and says like, look, man, you spend $100 and you're going to get 300 back by implementing this in your facility. Most people are going to say yes. So they're getting 300 back because, it's a direct function of the price of cannabis though. Price of cannabis drops. Now that 3-to-1 ROI could go to 2-to-1. Or if it's a 1-to-1, now shit, we're not spending money, we're not investing in research, those types of things. But yeah, all turns out to be more ROI based, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, I mean, we're doing a lot of studies with that. Like I said, we have a consulting group, Canna Consulting, where we have an awesome team, 2 PhDs along with a few other guys that are wicked smart. Director of Science at Aurora, first PhD in cannabis cultivation North America, Darren on our team. Awesome dude. They've run a whole bunch of like side-by-side tests in Canada. They actually have a Canadian government licensed cannabis research facility, which you can't even have in the US, where, the Canadian government gives these different licenses out. Some are like production licenses like Aurora and Canopy have and all that. The research ones, you can grow cannabis, send it to testing labs, do a whole bunch of side-by-sides, write academic papers on it. But then at the end, you have to take the cannabis and destroy it. So you can't sell it. So we have one of those up there. And we're testing like nutrients doing side-by-sides. There's just one that we tested, the Flava nutrient additive, where it like increased the yield by 14% versus the control in a statistically significant, well done white paper that we're publishing online here on the Ventana Plant Science website. And so that's a good product. They're also running tests for a lot of other nutrient companies who are just like, there's nutrient companies who come out and they're like, cool, we work in, maybe a different like ornamental flowers, but they have something that works really well for flowers. They'll send it to these guys who will do a side-by-side on cannabis and then give them the results. And if it does have like, let's just call it desired effects on the cannabis plant, then maybe that nutrient company will then bring a product into the cannabis industry. So our team does those kind of side-by-side tests for companies. And it's cool because we glean information on what's working, what isn't. But look, there's a lot of stuff they test that literally like doesn't do anything. They tell me the majority of stuff they test just like actually is just like marketing hype, doesn't really do anything. So the cool thing is we can take some of this knowledge and obviously their academic knowledge, everything they've done, and we can implement it on the consulting side so that we make like our customers have what we think is all the best knowledge available on growing cannabis.
You guys screen some of those ornamental nutrients as well for like other ingredients? Because I know within the ornamental market, they're not required to disclose all the other ingredients besides the active ingredient. So is that kind of some of the services that you provide the cultivators up there as well? I just know from experience that like some pyrethians can get in that aren't the major product, and then you get a random fail if you're in California for that kind of stuff. So are those kind of like safety measures and those kind of research projects that you guys conduct as well up in Canada?
That's interesting you brought that up. All the studies that are done on the nutrients are really efficacy trials.
Yeah.
Rather than us operating more like, let's say, I'll call it the California Department of Farm and Agriculture, I think it is.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. Where they would be like, cool, you want to sell your product in this state? Give us your MSDS. And then, they might have the product tested themselves before they greenlight it to be used. But no, we don't do something like what the California Department of Farm and Agriculture did. But I think we could. I just don't think anyone's asked us for, they're just looking usually for more efficacy trials.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. See if it works.
Can you expand on the differences of the two for those who might be unfamiliar with the differences in the two?
Yeah, the differences between like testing for efficacy versus testing for like whether there's something harmful in the nutrient that shouldn't be like used on something that's ingested. Yeah. So like really, the efficacy trials, usually they're focused on 3 things. So they're focused on, does it increase yield or does it increase quality, which is measured usually by cannabinoids or terpenes or, things of that nature. And then, on the other side, let's say it's a nutrient, you're just trying to figure out if it's safe. You're really looking for, are there any heavy metals, in the nutrient? Are there any things that are on a list of things that are in concentrations where they would not be healthy if someone ingested either by eating a product or smoking a product that it was grown with? And even going back to those pesticides like Avid and Forbid that we were chatting about earlier, like Eagle 20, like those are for ornamentals. Those are not for crops that you're meant to like eat or smoke. Like do not use that stuff. So like
they work well though.
They do work extremely well. But it'll kill you if you eat it too. So like,
there it is. There's the big but.
Yeah, there's the big but. So don't use that stuff. But the good thing is most states right now, they do testing prior to products going on market.
Yeah.
So like if someone's using that stuff in your cannabis in like any legal state, you're not buying like black market weed, you can be pretty rest assured that it doesn't have that stuff in it.
Agreed.
But it'd be good as a grower to like not obviously use a product, go through a whole harvest, send it to a lab, find out it failed, then you just lose probably millions of dollars. So yeah, I think any product that would be used that way would get pretty bad reputation pretty quickly.
Yeah, I agree.
Nate, what is one fact or statistic about growing cannabis that would shock 90% of the cannabis industry?
I mean, here's two things that maybe this is more market dynamic based, but I think the cost of production for cannabis, like it's going to be commoditized and it's going to be like $100 a pound in like probably 10 years, something like that. Like it's going to be a commodity just like any other thing that you grow, just like if you think about grain or strawberries, people are buying futures on cannabis and, things like that. And another thing that I think in the market, like I don't see in the next 10 years, there's going to be any interstate commerce of cannabis, even if it goes federally legal.
None? You don't see any?
I don't think that's going to happen. I think there might be like 3 states that would allow exportation, maybe importation, but the other like 47 states will be like, nah, we're not allowing that because they've already built cannabis commissions to regulate the industry within their state, and they get a lot of tax revenue and jobs from it. And as soon as you allow things to cross state borders, at least in a wholesale way, I don't mean like, oh yeah, you buy a joint in Cali and you drive to Arizona and it's like all of a sudden, you have the DEA rating you or something. But what I mean is like, I don't think there's going to be like a dispensary in Cali who wholesales 100 pounds to a dispensary in Arizona. That, for example, is what I don't think is going to happen because, Cali would have a pretty big advantage on growing cannabis over Arizona. And Arizona would see their cannabis market dry up pretty quickly, which would be a big hit to their tax revenue. So every rep and senator who wants to protect, their budget would vote against that.
What about states like New York that maybe don't have optimal growing conditions, that have a big appetite for cannabis? What do you think will happen there from, let's say, a price standpoint? If California can grow it at a really low level, New York is nobody wants
it'll be a little bit more in New York. And, it'll take a little bit more to grow. You have to grow in greenhouses to grow year round versus some other places where you can. So price will be a little bit higher and you'll employ more people.
Yeah. Good old money, right? Influences a lot of decisions.
It does. Yeah. But maybe going down to like, I'm trying to think, most of the stuff, like when it actually comes to like the biology of the plant and growing cannabis, I would say this actually. So 2 things that I think. One, THC and any cannabinoid testing is pretty imperfect. So like if you're like buying something that's 25%, like you could test parts of that same plant that would register like probably 30% and some that would register like 18%.
Yeah.
And, I don't think people understand the variability of THC testing. And also when you do blind smoking, when you basically remove the THC, just have people smoke it, usually the intensity of the high does not correlate with the percentage of THC actually on the bud. So I think, people need something to like figure out what the quality is. And like THC is kind of like the only objective indicator out there. So people got to use it. So like, I don't blame people for using it, but I would say, don't think that it's like, the North Star that's going to guide you, to where you want to go necessarily. So relax a little bit on that. Say, just smoke something, see how it works in your body. Try and remember that strain if it does.
What's your thoughts on the Indica versus Sativa conversation that's currently happening? Is that good for the industry? Is that bad for the industry? Is it good for consumers? What do you feel about that?
I think humans naturally just love to categorize and organize things. It's just so much cleaner. Yeah, so much cleaner for your head. I love to organize things and categorize and put them in buckets. But yeah, it seems like those buckets are a little bit more artificial right now than maybe useful, was what I would say. So it just comes back to like your mileage may vary. Like it's even funny, like people, I have a fiance, right? And when I was growing up, I could be like, yeah, and this is not true, but just hypothetically, I'm into blondes. And then you like meet a brunette. She's awesome. Oh, well, shit. I guess I'm into brunettes. Like
turns out you like women, right? Like you like women. That is the category.
Yeah, but it's like so. You like weed. You like smoke this Blue Dream that was like 30%. You're like, I'm gonna love that shit. And then you smoke it, and it's all right. But then you smoke this Granddaddy Perp that was like 14%. You're like, shit, dude. I love Granddaddy Perp. It's 14%, and I really thought I was gonna love this banger over here, but that's not the case. It's like. you kind of have to just like experience it. And since everybody's biology is so different, it's like, man, just take those categories, throw them out the window and realize we don't fucking know anything. You know?
Yeah, I agree.
What is your favorite strain?
Ooh, Dreamwalker. So that's the best one that I just had the most pleasant, and it's like so hard to find. These days there's so many strains. It's like if you smoke something once, like even just finding it again could be a mission, you know?
Yeah.
But I had this in Cali, like, yeah, probably like around 5 years ago. And it was just like, literally, I smoked it and I was just like, felt like I was like meditating for like 3 hours, you know? Like, but like if you meditate in that like part where you're like, okay, I'm in it, you know? Like I'm in the zone right now. Like I just felt like that for like 3 hours. I was like, oh, this is dope, you know? So I like that one, but I also more of like I'm more of like a nighttime smoker. So I more smoke, kind of like when the 7 to 8 p.m. kind of rolls around. And that's usually when I do it. I'm usually not too good at being like productive and smoking or like daytime going out with the friends and smoking as much. Yeah.
I mean, I go out, but I just don't talk, you know?
Yeah. No, it's yeah. And I obviously you can tell like I talk a fair amount. So when I smoke, I kind of slow down a little bit.
Same.
People are like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
People who know me. I'm like, oh, good, dude.
Just super high in the corner, like smiling.
Yeah.
Like, I'm totally fine. Just leave me
We're gonna
alone.
go get some food.
Yeah. I'm a big foodie too. So.
Who is an under the radar grower, brand, or strain that you think will explode over the next 2 years?
Dude, grower, my man Miles Sadowski. I gotta give that guy a shout out. I love that guy to death. He's a grower out here in Tucson, Arizona. Grows for Earth's Healing. I don't know his Instagram handle is like Miles for Grow or something. I'm gonna give him a good shout out. I'll find him while we're chatting. But that guy, literally, he started Legacy Dude, like, blown out shit. Next thing you know, get thrown into the fire, just like running a small facility out here in Arizona, self-taught, like everything, wicked smart. And now he just built out like 140,000 square foot, like greenhouse on top of the indoor they're growing out here. And he just like everything he reads, he just absorbs. And you just have a conversation with him. He's so casual. He's like my age. We both DJ and like hang out together just casually. But that guy is like, he's one of those guys that like is so humble. And then you have a conversation with him and he just like blows your mind. Right? So I love Miles. I think he'll be doing big things in the future. He's just had 2 kids though, so he's probably pretty busy. And then Cannabis brand that I think is going to blow up. Who's doing something? Well, this isn't a brand in particular, but this is more of a trend that I'm going to put out there. And some brands are jumping on this trend. But like, for example, have you guys ever tried any of like the kind of water-soluble nano-emulsified edibles?
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe. I've eaten so many of them at this point now. Maybe like I just pop them in as soon as I get them.
So those are becoming more and more popular. And what I do see in the future, I think, if I were to like guess, is like I've seen some sodas come out where they're like trying to be like the alternative to White Claw, where it's like, it comes on in 15 minutes and it's done in like an hour and a half. So it's like you can take an edible and you're not high for like 8 hours, and like they have those on the edible side. I think they're going to have them in like nasal sprays. They'll have them in drinks. And it's going to change the game on edibles. And edibles are so much more discreet than smoking that I think that is going to be a huge trend. And I see some brands jumping on getting those products kind of first to market in some states.
How would you know that those are that? Are they labeled on the product or are they just described a different way?
Yeah, they usually are labeled that way. Yeah. But if you like if you're like in a recreational or medical market, you walk in the dispensary or you just call them and be like, hey, do you have any like fast acting or nano emulsified product? They'll tell you. Or if they have no idea what you're talking about, they probably don't. So I know like usually it says like nano emulsified or fast acting or something like that. Like I think Wana gummies.
Yeah, Wana Quick, I think they call them.
Yeah. So they came out with some. Planet 13 had their high drink that was kind of like the White Claw type thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a company called Source, SORSE, that makes that product. It's like the input that a lot of people would be licensing to put in that stuff. So if you're a cannabis brand and you want to do it, hit up Source.
Shout out Joe.
I do not get paid for this. I don't even know who runs the company. Like
we're gonna send Joe at Source an invoice after this for sponsoring.
Gotta love Joe.
Cool. Sounds good. Yeah, give me $5 too for a drink.
Right.
What is one takeaway you have found through your experience that most growers or facilities are overlooking?
I think there's In California, not so much, but I think in a lot of other states, they're not doing testing in their plants for certain viruses. Hop latent viroid is probably the most well-known and popular one. And what happens when you have plants, and the plants can have like varying degrees of HLV. So it's not like, you know, it's not binary. It's not like you have it or you don't. It's like your plant can be kind of infected, medium infected, or super infected. But what can happen is if it's just barely infected, you're just like, man, you know, my yields are going down a little bit and my testing results on the cannabinoid side are going down. And like that's one of the indicators that you could have HLV along with a few other kind of morphological things in the plant. But I think there's a lot more people who are growing who have HLV in their gardens who don't know they have it and are having like issues where like, you know, their yield is just slowly going down over time. And they're like, oh, I got to switch my mom's out. Oh, I got to switch the lighting. I got to switch the nutrients. My light, you know, there's some weird happening. And it's just like HLV. You got to get your plants tested, take some plant tissue, get it tested, figure out if you have it. And, you know, the problem is that like, the good thing is plants don't really pass it from like just hanging out in the same room. It's kind of like AIDS. You have to like pass it via like, you know, tissue or like blood, things like that. But usually how people get it is like cutting clones. You'll cut one from one mother and it's on your blade. And then you cut another one from another mother. And now you just transferred it to that clone from one mother to another. Okay. They've even found out that it can transfer like through seeds. So you can have a seed that has HLV right out of the gate. So you should still be testing things like that. But that's one thing you should definitely watch out for, I'd say.
That's a good one. Since you've been in the cannabinoid industry, what has been the biggest misconception?
Maybe that everyone's just killing it, like rolling in money every night. Like, you know, I think a lot of people assume that. I think there was like a study that came out that was like 2/3 of like cannabis businesses that have opened within the last 5 years are still not profitable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, just because it's got the allure, like this black market appeal where you're just like, you know, Pablo Escobar, your money. It's like, it's not like that. It's just another business. And honestly, there's not a lot of great guidelines on how to run the business well. That's why there are a lot of consulting groups like ours who try and take some best practices and apply them to different people, help them out, become successful faster, like learn from other people's mistakes, not your own. But yeah, man, it's a new industry. People are still trying to pave the way. I would say the road to success right now is still like a muddy trench. Yeah. It's not like a well-paved road, you know? So that's a big one. Yeah.
Before we do predictions, we ask all of our guests, if you could sum up your experience in a main takeaway or lesson learned to pass on to the next generation, what would it be?
A little bit of putting yourself outside of your comfort zone and just trying to start at the bottom if you really want to be somewhere, but make it known that you want to learn and you want to grow. Don't assume that other people are going to know that and that they're just going to like throw you on the back of their coattails and take you with them. Like say like, look, down and put in the work, but I want to be constantly progressing and getting better. And I'm willing to put myself outside of my comfort zone to do that. And look for, you know, I think the most learning I've done in this industry or just in my professional life have been the days that have been really hard and really shitty. Those are definitely the ones that provided the most growth for me. The days that go really well are nice to have, but if you just have those days, you're going to have a false sense that you're actually good at something because you're probably not. You're just like misattributing the fact that everything is going well to it being something that you brought about. I mean, humans just fucking, I'm telling you, man, I don't even know if I can swear here, but I'll just, yeah.
You let it out. Yeah. Just
okay. Well, I'll start it over because humans, you know, have a natural inclination to just have good days and bad days and just find your own way to weather the bad days because then the good ones will come and you're going to be a stronger person for it. Probably something related to that.
It's really well said.
Thanks.
All right, prediction time. Nate, okay. It's 2028. When you walk into a dispensary to buy flower, what characteristics will help consumers select the product of their choice?
Interesting. I like this question, man. This is good. You guys have come up with some good questions. Okay. I think what would be really cool is to figure out some type of like cannabis genetics. You know, if we can really attribute them to like where in the world we think that we first had a record of that product being grown. It'd be really cool to like look at the genetic material. Like I'm assuming the genetic testing is going to become way cheaper 6 years from now. But, you'd be able to tell like, oh man, this is like from the Middle East. This is some like Afghani stuff. And, maybe we come up with a better way to like isolate more cannabinoids, and the artificial intelligence ends up figuring out the interaction of some of these cannabinoids and terpenes a little bit better. And by figuring out those interactions maybe it's funny, we might come up with new buckets to put things in. And I almost think of it like the Myers-Briggs test. There's like INTJ and all of those kind of things. There's all these like 16 buckets that, you can put things in. Like with cannabis, I think we might end up coming up with our own buckets that we make based off of kind of AI figuring out what actually, let me see, you have a background in biology. So let's see, what would we call that? The interplay between multiple variables.
Polypharma.
Okay. Yes.
Right. So currently it's only single APIs. This is how the pharmaceutical industry treats diseases. And that's why like Marinol and Syntax, which is just THC molecule, that's why they never really took off with like chemotherapy as a treatment, because there's that missing variable besides just THC. So like if you ever eat Marinol, you feel really weird. If you eat an edible that's just distillate, it's not the same as smoking flower at all. Which is why wild gummies have just exploded across the entire nation, is because they're capturing the full spectrum. So they're including all of these other phytochemicals that are in the plant into their gummies, right?
Exactly.
So that's exactly it.
Yeah. And so it'd be cool if we could like find these like categorizations of buckets. So we find like certain interactions work certain ways. And these are buckets that we like don't even know what they are right now.
Yeah.
Let's say, and then we put them in there. That's what I think the future might look like.
No, and I think you're completely right. And there's an organization called the CESC, the Clinical Endocannabinoid Science Consortium. And what they're doing is going through and trying to tie specific terpenes and cannabinoids, right? So like type 1, type 2, type 3. Type 1 being THC heavy, type 2 being THC and CBD, then type 3 just being CBD dominant. They're trying to tie those three types with specific terpenes to like a cause and effect situation. And they're on the brink of publishing all this data. So I don't really want to kind of like do a spoiler alert and take their thunder from. But there's come up with some really, really astounding results and some really, really cool correlations. They ran a massive dosing project, is what it's called, out in California, where they had all of these consumers. It's called an objective study. It's not a clinical trial, right? Because everyone is willingly participating and willingly giving the information, right? And so they took all this data from the dosing analysis, says like, hey, I tried this strain, and they know that this strain has these terpenes and these cannabinoids. And then they try to do like a cause and effect situation. They took these massive data sets for the whole entire like California consumer market. And then they tried to correlate it to like cause and effect. And they came up with some really cool correlations. But I think they're kind of in the last stages of publishing that information. So I don't want to kind of like disclose anything that is about to be published by them. So, but they're really working on it, and you literally hit the nail right on the head. And I believe that that's exactly how consumers will make those decisions in 6 years. And I think that the Indica Sativa hybrid thing is great, but I think that what this will do is kind of come in on the backside and provide that robust scientific foundation. Because right now it's just really tough to know, okay, Blue Dream should be an indica, but was that Blue Dream's lineage perfect, right? Is it the true lineage that everyone says? Or was one grower somewhere in the middle there being like, Blue Dream's crushing it this year, I'm just going to call this Blue Dream, no one's going to know, right? Yeah. And so it's like tough to say if that's truly like a concrete foundation within the strain naming protocol. And I think that as the industry matures more and more science gets involved, this kind of foundation will actually help us sort out those kind of categories that we've grouped them in.
Exactamundo. I mean, that study sounds super interesting. I got to get my hands on that. So
I'll connect you to Dr. John Abrams and John Talleyrand. They're running, it's an MD and a PhD immunologist, and they have a whole group of people. Love to connect you. You can chat with them, and meet super, super smart people doing really, really robust scientific research on this stuff. So
they're also going to publish some studies in our cannabinoid playbook. So you can definitely see that because it'll be in the playbook for the next 6 months. So we'll definitely have some of that research coming out. And Kellen didn't tease it correctly. He teased it, but he didn't give all the information. Where to find the information.
Yeah, but that's why you're here. I didn't want to take you as thunder, Brian.
Cannabinoid Playbook.
Yeah, we'll play this out. So I agree. I think the effects is definitely where we're going to go. And we definitely need the science background to kind of validate that, because if you're looking to take a creative product, let's say during the day to spark, some breakthroughs and some of the challenges you're having, and then you have like one of those heavy products that put you to sleep, it's not going to work, right? And even more so if you give it to a more inexperienced consumer who's more hesitant to try and say, hey, like this is a more uplifting feeling, and then they experience it and it puts them into the couch and they don't like it, they might be perturbed to not try again. And I think we really need to find that balance between scientific information to kind of validate some of these claims and also communicating to consumers when they walk into a dispensary for the first time, so they're not overwhelmed. Because like for me, I've only been into a large handful of dispensaries since I'm locked into New York here. And when you go into some of these Cali, these Washington dispensaries, there's hundreds of products. And it's like, this is almost overwhelming. I want to buy all of these, but I also want to try new products and I'm unsure where even to start. So I would imagine some other people who have that inexperience might have that same feeling when they walk into these dispensaries for the first time.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things that just kind of occurred in my head, but it's like, we have such a, like right now, like I would say a little bit of like a curiosity in really figuring out like what cannabis does what, and like what types of cannabis do, have certain, effects or things like that. But then I was thinking about like beer and I'm like, man, I drink like a Pilsner or drink like an IPA, and I actually have like a pretty different effect from those two. And I don't think it's just the alcohol content. I think there's actually more going on.
Because it's like wine drunk, right? Like you get wine drunk versus beer drunk versus like, I was in grad school and I was sitting with my professor and he was like, you go to a party where there's a keg. The vibe is way different. Everyone's like smiling, giggling, whatever. You go to a party where everyone's just taking vodka shots, completely different vibe. And like he's saying that he was attributing it to the terpenes. And this was like way before cannabis was legal or anything like that. And he's a big beer brewer. And I think that also is why you saw this huge influx of microbrews in the last like 15 years, because they're increasing those terpene content. And like brewing beer has truly become a really intense like scientific process for these microbreweries. You go to like Odell's or some of these big breweries here in Colorado up in Fort Collins, and they literally have like organic molecules drawn all over the entire whiteboards. And they're all like trying to figure out what hops have what chemicals in them to try to get the beer and the flavors. So I think, it's exactly it, right? I think it's the terpenes, because wine drunk is very different than beer drunk.
Or vodka drunk. Yeah, there's definitely some cultural things. I think there's, cultural things with like the people who take the vodka shots versus the people that drink the beer versus the people that drink the wine. There's probably some, multivariate analysis needs to be done on that.
Exactly.
The interesting thing is like, we're going after understanding cannabis like so much more intensely than understanding beer. Like even though the beer people are super into it, they're just like, oh yeah, make a beer, tastes great. And they're more about taste and then like ABV, right? But it's like, they've kind of stopped. They're just like, now we're just going after different flavor profiles, but they're not saying like, oh yeah, this beer is going to make you, it's an aphrodisiac for you or something, or this one is going to make you, I don't know, give more energy or something like that. They're not like categorizing or marketing beers that way, which is interesting. It's just more of like a little bit of a realization, but I don't think there's much to it. Yeah.
It's also challenging for consumers too, right? We're asking them to make decisions based on like form factors, and then the Indica Sativa is a common one. And then we're asking them to decide on like strain names. Then we're asking them to decide on cannabinoid content. And now we're introducing terpenes to them. And plus, as we talked about before, the combination of those variables influences outcomes completely different. So we're kind of making it a little more challenging for the consumer than we should. But there's also this balance of like the science needs to catch up. We also have the consumer needs to catch up. So we got a lot of variables that we got to work through in the next 5 to 6 years.
Once you start doing something, this maybe goes into the cultural practice too, but there's a little bit of stickiness to it that's hard for you to like change everyone over to a new mode of thought. Like every dispensary in California can't just like say, oh yeah, we're getting rid of Indica and Sativa today. And then, we're done with it because it doesn't really mean anything. like people still want to shop that way, even if they know that it's probably wrong.
Yes.
Like you can't like just take it away. It's like, it's going to take years of trying to come up with some alternative to give these people before they can move off of it. So like this stuff is going to, the change, there's cool things that are happening, but the societal change will be a little bit like,
it's not a light switch.
No, your consumers are always right. So if they walk in, they're asking, I'm looking for Indica or Sativa, how can you be that establishment that's like, you know what, we don't have that here. We don't abide by those principles. Those are the wrong buckets. Sorry.
Like, sorry, we don't call things Indica anymore. They're going to be like,
am I in the right store?
Yeah.
Cool. So Nate, for our listeners, they want to get in touch, they want to learn more, and they want to watch Canna Cribs. Where can they find you?
Yeah. So the YouTube channel is actually called Growers Network. The series is Canna Cribs on the YouTube channel Growers Network. Growershouse.com is the e-commerce site where we sell everything you need to grow cannabis, nutrients, lighting, like 16,000 products, whether you're a hobbyist or commercial grower. Growersnetwork.org is the forum, stuff like that. And they all have their social media channels and stuff like that. And then I have my own Instagram, nate.j.lipton. If you want to hit me up, I respond to DMs like 90% of the time, I'd say. I'm not perfect, but I try.
Cool. We'll link all those up in the show notes. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys.
Hey there, this is Cheryl Murray Powell Esquire, and I'm the host of the Terps in the City podcast. I'm a cannabis agricultural dietary supplement and trade attorney. I'm also a hemp farmer, and I've been recently named to the list of High Times Magazine's top 100 influencers in cannabis. I'm inviting you to follow me along my journey as I move back to New York to support the adult use market there. You're going to get a chance to listen to conversations with some of my friends along the way. I look forward to seeing you at Terps in the City.